In this video, we're going to make this beach themed desk. It's got LED lights in it, seashells, shark's teeth, made with concrete and epoxy. So stay tuned and I'll show you how I did it. So what we're going to start with here is something I made way before I started this YouTube channel, and it is a piece of concrete. Now, it's not normal concrete. It's called glass fiber reinforced concrete. So what we have is when you make this, and I'm sorry, I can't really show you how I made this because I didn't even have this camera at the time. I wasn't planning a YouTube channel at the time. But I made two of these, and I made a desk out of one several years ago. And I thought, well, let's make two of them at the same time because it's a little bit of work to get everything prepared for this. So I thought I might as well just utilize my time better and make two of them. So what you do, basically, a brief rundown of glass fiber reinforced concrete, is you spray in a top layer. So this is all cast upside down. You spray in a top layer, and then you make a batch of a bottom layer that has fiberglass fibers in it, and that's what makes it strong. So the top layer will be as smooth as whatever you're casting it into, and what you can do is make this a lot thinner. So it saves a lot of weight and a lot of materials if you don't have to make it solid concrete. And this is strong, but allows me to make it a lot lighter weight. So in essence, you could make countertops in your shop and carry them, you make them off site and carry them onto the project site. Saves the mess of doing work in someone's kitchen, things like that. So that's kind of the concept behind it. And what I did was, because you cast this upside down and I wanted a beach scene, I took spray foam and sprayed it into the form and kind of carved out the shape I wanted to form that shoreline, and then it fades away. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically build water here and make this look like a beach, fill in some blue-green type colors, and just fill that area in to build the desk the rest of the way out, and it'll probably come out another 10 inches past there. This will just be all epoxy. Now, something I had thought of that I thought might make this an extra cool thing is I wanted to embed some LED lights to make the water kind of glow. So what I'm going to end up doing here, and this is just an afterthought, is I'm going to cut away some of this edge so I can recess some LED lights in there. I don't really want to see the bulbs, so I was kind of hoping to just set them down in a little bit. At least that's the plan as of right now. Put the LEDs in. Probably I'll put some supports under here to tie the legs into, because there's going to be a void right here that I don't want, because we don't want to fill this all with epoxy. That just adds weight. So we'll seal this off and make sure it doesn't seep up underneath. Now, before I get too far into this, you wouldn't have to do this with concrete. You could use a live edge slab just as easily and do the exact same thing I'm showing you. I just thought this was kind of a cool way to do it. I tinted the concrete color that I thought kind of looked like sand. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle some shark's teeth and shells on this shoreline area so you can see those down through. That is the game plan. First thing I'm going to do is try to figure out how to get these LED lights in there without affecting this edge too much. So we're going to get into a grinder and see how that goes. Now I want to mount a few boards underneath here, and the sole purpose of these boards is going to be to attach the legs to. You could use tap cons and tap into the concrete. However, there's going to be a void here, and I need something to just to make sure that I can tie the leg in to something solid. So what'll happen is I'll get this ground out into place so it sits below the surface so everything stays level. Then when I go to flip the table over, the first layer of epoxy will kind of lock everything in. It'll seep back in, it'll lock everything in, and then everything should be good, strong, and ready for the legs when that time comes. So I don't want this to extend out because I don't want to see this piece of wood through the epoxy. So I will end up cutting this off, but I'm going to grind out the area where it's going to set. So I'm going to figure out about how far in to come. Try to make it equal on both sides. I'm going to actually mark this with a Sharpie just so I have an idea of where it's going to go. Never going to see this. And then this gives me an idea of where I need to grind down to account for that piece of wood. Now, my work area here, I've used this for epoxy numerous times. I have some of it I just recently retaped for a table, but the area that is retaped isn't going to cover the entire new desktop I'm making. So I need it to be about this wide right here. And I'm going to need it to go probably 2/3 of the way across this table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to retape this. I need to tape to about that mark, and then I'm going to go out here. So I want these boards to stay in this place when I flip it over. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tack it in place with some hot glue. Now, if you don't have hot glue gun, construction adhesive, I'm sure would work just as well. The important thing is so that all we need to be able to do is flip it without these things going flying. So hopefully this works and we can do that. It should work, and it's not, like I said, it's not a permanent solution. What it'll do is it will allow it to stay in place until the epoxy that we put in here can flow up underneath and kind of fill out the bottom here. Okay, so these have dried. Should stay in place for the flip. So I'm just going to flip it over. And that's good. It's exactly what I wanted. It should be right where I want it when the time comes for the epoxy. Now I got a little bit of a dust mess here. I'm going to blow this off, and then I'm going to start building the form. Now, one thing I forgot to do with this is put my LED lights in. These are the Govee RGBIC lights. These things are amazing. I think they cost me $10 because they were on sale. It was like a $5 off. I will put the link in the description. But the nice thing about these is you can control the color. There's a bunch of preset options that look really cool, and one of them, the one I have in mind, is one that has like an underwater kind of shimmer look type it, where it's going to just shift colors. The nice thing about these is every light can be a different color. Some strips you get where each section of the strip has to be the same, so you might have a foot of one color, a foot of the next, or the entire strip is going to be the same. This is each individual light, and the RGBIC is what you're looking for to get that type of effect. And the great thing about it is it just changes everything you can do with these things. They are amazing. So I'm going to have one challenge, and that is I have to mount this controller up underneath because it's attached to the strip, and I need to keep it out of the epoxy. So I'm going to have to tape it in place. What's going to end up happening is the entire bottom is going to fill with epoxy, a thin layer. And what I'll end up doing then is I'm going to protect this and then cut away the epoxy where this is so I can get back to it once it's dry. So it's a little bit risky in that aspect, but it's really the only way to do it. But I want to set this down here like this. I'm going to protect the plug, and I got to protect that box. So I'm going to use this tape. I'm going to cover this plug with the tape. Like so. I'll put it inside the bag. This will help ensure that it won't leak. Now, I have it all zipped on that bag except for the very corner. I'm going to tape the entire thing in place. So I'm going to rip this back strip off, even though I don't think it's going to stick. One thing you gotta be careful with is watch sharp curves with these. Actually, I'm gonna run it out this way. You can do damage to the strip, which you don't want to do. So you just gotta watch you gotta make real gradual curves. It's actually sticking to the concrete that I ground out for this groove decently. I don't trust it. I will definitely run some hot glue. So we're going to bring this back in. What's going to happen with this, I think, is it should shine out into the epoxy. And then the underside of the desk area should just kind of glow with whatever pattern I choose for this. And I have something already in mind. There's one, like I said, that kind of looks like underwater. So that's the plan. So I'm going to snake this around here, and I'll hot glue it down, and we'll be good. So in order to build this frame, what I have is I have a piece of melamine board with pocket holes in the back, and it's wrapped in the same tape so that the epoxy doesn't stick. Now what I'm going to do is I need to fasten this to this bench, and then what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to first run a bead of silicone on the underside of this. This is just a clear silicone, a real dry clear. And I'm just going to coat the entire bottom of this. If you've seen any of my other videos on where I make epoxy forms or do any kind of epoxy work, this is just my standard procedure. And the whole purpose of this is to prevent it from leaking out the bottom. So, start with that. We're going to just place it here on the edge of the table. And I'm going to screw this down with pocket hole screws. So that covers this one. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same type of idea going up the sides. I'm actually going to leave the back without a form. It's going to probably run over a little bit onto the table, which will be okay. But before I fasten these, one thing I want to do is I'm going to seal up the underside here with a bead of silicone the whole way around to prevent it from leaking out going back through. I because we're going to let some flow underneath, I know if I don't do this, it is going to come out the back side right there because it is not a perfectly flat piece of concrete. And so we have to seal those gaps up anyways. So that's what I'm going to do now. Now I need to establish exactly where this top is going to be. So I just need to get a tape measure out and measure and set the back side of the concrete slab and make it equal at both ends. In addition to that, I need to slide this down to set the end board on my frame or my form so that everything else can be put in place correctly. So we'll put that in place, we'll screw it down, use silicone underneath just like the other sides, and we're ready to move on. Okay, so I've also siliconed this. I just used some of the leftover. I put a little bit too much on. So one thing I like to do when I fasten these forms is I want to screw the side and the top in place. I do like to draw it in from the end. Make sure there's a good seal in this corner. We do not want this epoxy to leak. Very important that it does not leak. So we are going to be extra careful to seal everything up really good. Alright, so finish this off. We'll just do this end the same way. So I'm just going to smash that up against there. And screw it in as well. So we finally got to the point where I can pour this. Been anxiously awaiting this. So what I'm going to start with is I'm going to start with a clear epoxy. And then I have some sand that I have a bag of sand here that I use to make the concrete products with. And I just grabbed a container of that. And I think what I'm going to do is just sprinkle it on here just to help kind of fill in and give some more realistic look to the beach area. There's a decent chance that this won't be seen, but this can't hurt. I do know, like, it is kind of tricky mixing epoxy and sand. It kind of just floats and you don't get a true look, but this is still going to be better than nothing. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I need to blow this out. There's a little bit of dust in here, so I'm going to get my air gun. I'm going to blow it out, and then I'm going to pour the epoxy over this first. Let it flow down, and my hope is for it to flow back underneath because this is not sealed. And I just want it to fill up a little bit underneath. I don't want it to fill the whole entire way because we have the light controller and stuff like that I want to eventually get back to. Now I don't want it puddling here. So I'm going to take this Bondo spreader and coat all the areas, make sure everything has epoxy on it where I want it, and then I'm just going to push it off. If it puddles, the epoxy or the sand is going to look terrible. So I don't want it sand floating. I really just want to put a thin layer on. It'll start floating up in the epoxy, and then we'll end up down in the bottom here. I don't really necessarily want that either. So I'm not worried about the epoxy getting up on the actual dry beach part. This is all going to get epoxy on it. And the reason I would love to keep this beach part dry, no epoxy, but because this is a desktop, the transition from the wave to the dry, there's always going to be a ridge where the epoxy stops. And if you're writing on a desk, you don't want a ridge like that. So it needs to be nice and smooth for the top. So eventually this whole thing will be covered with epoxy, at least a thin layer. One good thing about doing it like this also, is that it's going to seal this up, and we shouldn't have anything bubbling out of it after this point, because all the air holes in the concrete will all be sealed, and air holes can cause problems if you don't do this early on in the process. And this goes for wood as well as concrete. You always want to seal up the wood before you actually get into the deeper pours, because it's going to eventually bubble out. If it's going to bubble, you want it to bubble in this stage, not in your last stage. Because I've had it bubble in the last stage, and it's not a fun thing. Now I'm going to start sprinkling some sand on here. The thing with sand and epoxy is it darkens really fast, and you lose that sand look really fast. I don't want any of this to be loose, so I'm just going to take a gloved hand. Quite honestly, I don't care if it gets the whole way down to the end of the concrete here. So this is hard enough, cured enough that I'm ready to do the next layer. Before I do that, I want to get this loose sand off of here, so I'm going to vacuum it off here. Okay, so we are ready to start adding some color. I'm going to split this up into 2 different containers. Now, I want to put a little bit of clear on the part that already has sand, just to try to lock that in so we get no floaters going forward. So I'm going to just pour a little bit of this on, let it flow. Probably rub it in with my gloved hand here, just to make sure everything's sealed. One other thing I can do is, while this is still wet here on the sand part, I can actually get the shells and stuff I want out, start putting them in. The point of that would be to get them kind of locked into place so they don't move and float as I start pouring deeper epoxy on this entire thing. So what I'll do is I mix these up and just kind of get an eye for how much tint is in there, and then add accordingly. If I think it's, in the where the sand is, so off like the beach area, I don't care. It can be a little more of a solid color, and that's fine. But once I start getting to where the shells are and stuff, I don't want a whole lot of color in these, because it tends to block out what I want people to be able to see down inside. One other thing, when you're mixing, always mix with the lighter color first. That actually looks pretty good to me. But if you mix with the lighter color first, then switch to the darker, you don't contaminate that lighter color with the dark colors. It's not as important with the dark, because the dark color tends to overpower the light color anyways. So we're going to stir that in. This is definitely not tinted enough. The reason I do a dark blue is if you look at, the beach, as the water gets deeper, blue gets darker. So just trying to simulate that as much as possible. We do a lot of our vacationing on the Gulf Coast of Florida. We're actually moving there here next week, and this is pretty much how the water looks along the Gulf Coast. You got the dark blues and the turquoises. So I'm just trying to simulate that as much as possible. All right, so the way we do this is I pour dark blue in the deep end and the light blue in the shallow end. Just gonna pour it like this. And then I'm gonna come in here, pour it like this. And what will happen is the colors will force each other back. So if you pour too much, it's okay. As long as you get the other color in, it'll stop the flow and keep it on the end it's supposed to be on, if that makes sense. But I think it's good to kind of blend the two colors a little bit. I don't like to see just a really set line. So I'll take a stick and just kind of blend them together. Straight lines don't look right. They just don't look natural. So I'm just going to sprinkle on some of these shark's teeth. Now, one thing you can do to check to see if any of these are going to be an issue as the epoxy gets higher, you just want to make sure it's going to clear. Just run a level. A couple of these are going to be close. I just want to make sure they're lower than the beach. I'm going to pop these bubbles right here. And then we should be ready to, we'll wait for the next coat. So I'm going to start by just pouring these in a little bit at a time. I don't want them to flood too far past where the zone is that I want that color. I'm going to start with a lighter one. Now when I mix these up, I mix up a little less color each time. I want them to be more and more transparent as it gets to the top. I'll put the darker color in back here in the back. The reason I do a little bit at a time is I don't want one to push out too far and then not be able to pour the other color in, and then I'm pouring on top of a color, and it's better if I get some of it established first, because it'll push away from where I'm pouring as it gets fuller. And it can cause some problems if I don't at least have a little bit established. So this pretty much filled this bottom up to the beach. I have a little bit more clear mixed up right now. What I need to do is mix in a little bit of this blue-green tint, so enough so I can start bringing it up to where the shells are. I don't want too much blue-green tint where the shells are, but I want some. So I'm going to mix a little bit more of that color into that. And I'm still going to keep some clear and pour it in as well. It's always good to have a little bit of clear in reserve, just in case, like when I want these shells to be seen, if you have a little bit too much tint around the shells, I can pour some of that clear over top of the shell, and it'll push that blue-green away from it, make it a lot more visible. All right, now I'm just going to pop bubbles. Now we have multiple layers to pour in here, and so I'm going to just hurry through this. It's the same process the whole way up through. Dark colors on one side, lighter colors in the middle, and then we're going to go with clear, a little bit more clear up on the beach area. So we're going to rush through this and get back to the rest of the build. As I get closer to the top of the desk, I want to stir up the epoxy a little bit. It gives a little bit of a color shimmer and makes it look more like waves. Just something nice you can do, really easy to do, but you gotta wait till right before the epoxy starts to set before you do it, because it'll settle those colors back out and you won't get the same effect if you don't wait. So now it's time to put the waves in and give it that look where you see from the beach where the waves are breaking. And what we're going to use is a white alcohol ink. We're going to mix it in with just a little bit of epoxy. And the key when you're doing this is, one, you need a heat gun, and two, you got to warm that white epoxy up, and it'll spread out and look kind of frothy if you do, and give that foamy wave type of look. If you don't warm it up, this is not going to work very well. So the key to it is blowing into the white epoxy. Now you pour a clear base first, but then you make where you want the waves to be, you make lines and heat the white lines up until it starts to just naturally spread out. Once you see it naturally spreading out, then you can blow it in the direction you want it to go with that heat gun. I would not start trying to blow it until you see the white start to just naturally spread away from the line that you created. It works a lot better. It took me a lot of attempts to figure this out. That is the best technique that I've come up with so far. So I highly recommend doing it that way. One other thing I like to do when I'm pouring these white line waves in is I like to layer them. So you do one, then you do another layer, and then do another layer, and it builds depth into your wave, so it's not all just right on top. You kind of have them building on top of each other, and I feel you get a little bit more natural look when you do that. After finishing the last epoxy coat, we just take apart the form. We drive some shims up underneath the epoxy to bust it loose, and it might take a few shims, go around the entire top, but eventually it'll pull loose, and we get ready for the next step, which is pouring a flood coat over top of everything. Now, in order to pour that flood coat, I need to do a little bit of prep work. First, I set the top up on some blocks so that when I do pour this flood coat, it can drip off and not just get resealed to the table. Now, those blocks are also wrapped in the tape so that the epoxy doesn't bond the blocks to the tabletop. That's very important. The other thing I did was I went over everything with a sander and just cleaned up some of the high spots, especially on the sides where the epoxy met the concrete. I had some spots that were a little bit high and thicker, and so I needed to clean that up so that it was a nicer transition. And the nice thing about when you sand epoxy is when you pour new epoxy over top, it just kind of heals the sanding marks, so you'll never see them. As long as you get that dust off, you're good. Once I did that, I did one more wave that crashed up onto the beach. I wanted some of the waves to appear actually on the sand area. I poured in just the same way I did everything else. I also need to make sure that you spread the epoxy so it flows nicely, not only over the top, but down the sides. Otherwise, you'll get weird drips down the sides and the sides won't be even. Then all we need to do is I just recoated it one more time after that, and it was good to go. So I had a local fabricator put these legs together. Now, what my intentions were with these legs for this desk is I actually took a picture of the Venice, Florida fishing pier, which is where our house is located, and this desk is going to go in that house. And we're less than a mile from the fishing pier there. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to make legs that looked like the legs of the fishing pier. So I took a picture off of Google, and I just tried to determine what the angles were by using, I found some app online where you could import a picture and check angles within a picture. So I came up with this. I knew how wide I wanted it at the base, and then that determined everything else once I figured out what these angles needed to be. So I had the fabricator make it. We've got a flat plate on top for mounting it. I just got done just cleaning off the legs. So I'm going to get ready to prime these. I'm going to paint them. My attempt is to try to make these look like concrete because that's what the pier legs are made out of. So I got a couple paints this morning and we'll see how well I did when I selected them. So let's get started on the primer. All right, so what I settled on to make it look kind of close to the concrete that is on the pier is this Rust-Oleum hammered. The reason I chose the hammered is because you get that concrete that has just some variation in color. This was the closest I could get. I know it's intended to look like metal, but I think it's going to work okay for this look as well. So we're going to put that on and see how it goes. So I'm not really liking how this color is on these legs. The gray looks more metal. I see almost no hammered look to it. So I have this, I don't even know what color it is, ultra matte slate that I'm gonna just spritz over top of it to give it kind of a little bit of more of a textured look. You think about you and you see concrete, it has some color variations within the concrete. You also get some pits just over time of it wearing. So I'm hoping that this kind of just gives it that look. So I am going to just spritz it over top and let it settle on it. Okay, so I have, this is the bottom side. I brought this down to my Florida house. So as I said in other videos, I'm transitioning from Ohio to Florida. So I'm now in my shop / garage in Florida, and we're gonna finish this here because this is gonna go inside the house as our personal desk. This top board is nice and solidly encased inside the epoxy. I was hoping that the bottom would be the same, but it's not. As you can see, we have a gap back in here, and this moves, and I don't like that. So come up with an idea. We're going to spray some spray foam back in behind here to fill in that gap. Going to come in from this side. I'd like more of it on the bottom side than on the top. I don't want the spray foam to interfere with these lights at all if I can avoid it. So we're going to spray some spray foam in. Then I'm going to set it on the board so that this can't push out further than it's supposed to. Set it right on a 2x4 and let it dry like that. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry, and then I'll come in and cut out whatever I need to cut out to fix it and clean it up. So the spray foam worked. I just need to trim some of this up. I don't want all this extra. I'm just gonna peel it away where I don't want it. But it's firm. It's exactly what I needed. So I have some drips from the last time that I poured epoxy. I'm gonna clean those up, and then I'm just ready to put these legs on and get it in use. So to finish this thing off, I just need to center these legs on the bottom side of the desktop, and I need to make sure that they are also going to be drilled into that wood piece on each end. So I get an even spacing from side to side, and then I space it at a set distance from the end of the desk, and then all I need to do is pre-drill some holes and get some of my bolts out and just run those light bolts into the leg, and it's ready to go. So here it is. As you can see, turned out great. The LED lights look amazing. The glow at nighttime underneath is pretty cool. It lights up back through just how I wanted it. Turned out great. This desk is going to serve our family well for a long time. I love how the legs turned out. The speckled look really did add what I hoped to and made it look like a real concrete leg. Everything turned out exactly how I wanted, so I'm really pleased with this thing. Thanks for watching. Check these videos out and hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps the channel out, and we'll get back to something again next week.